The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jubilant, I'll be interviewing a whole range of people you come across as a detective, including police, bad guys and victims. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer just interviewing bad guys. Instead, I'm taking the public into the world in which I operated. The guests I selected have amazing stories from all sides of the law. The interviews are raw and honest, just like the world they inhabited. No one who steps into the world of crime comes out unchanged. Join me now while I take you into this world. This episode of I Catch Killers contains conversations that some listeners may find confronting or triggering. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to part 2 of I Catch Killers with Karen Davis. We're going to talk about your books because I'm very interested in getting into your books. But before we do, I'd like to talk about your time as a detective. First of all, why did you become a detective? And then your experiences as a detective, also covering your time as an undercover operative.
Okay, yep. Where do you start there? I became a detective because I became a detective a bit later in my career, actually. I'd already had children, mainly because I thought I wanted to be able to go to different areas. Like, you know, when I was in plain clothes in a squad and I was basically doing detective work, but to actually go anywhere else you needed to have your designation. So, and I just wanted to better myself and kind of, you know, learn a bit more about interviewing and by the time I actually did it, I did it the hard way, I think, because it was a diploma and it was kind of you would have done it very differently back in with the ball ring and all that kind of stuff. But so it was a whole year. I was in investigators course and and I did all in between having kids, and then the detectives course. And I just wanted to be able to go to different areas. And a part of my training, I actually worked.
So with the detectives course and investigators course, the investigators course is the prelude to the detectives course.
That's right. Yeah.
Teaching you basic skills.
Yeah.
Then the detectives course. Did you do face-to-face at the detectives course?
You actually lectured at my detectives course.
I remember you well.
Yeah, right. There's 200 of us out there or something, but you remember me.
Yeah.
I remember you coming from homicide. We had a lot of people coming out doing their case studies and things like that. I went to child protection, yes, to answer that question. I went there, so I was doing a lot of hands-on stuff. And I worked with homicide. I worked with Angelo Momolo for a bit, just to get a bit of an eye-opener and a bit of just a little bit of experience in that kind of world, what you did in homicide, what you did. Child protection, I stayed there for 9 months, I think, and that was pretty much enough for me by that stage because, as I said, I had small kids and dealing with some pretty horrible people and stuff, pedophiles and the like. But that gave me a lot of interviewing techniques because, you know, I locked up a lady who was poisoning her own child. She had that what do you call it? Thing called Munchausen by proxy. Yeah, that's right. She was a nurse. She knew exactly how much to give her 18-month-old boy. Used to overdose on her pancreatitis medication, I think it was, and she'd get him, he'd go to hospital, but she'd always leave the hospital, all different hospitals, before he had before the blood tests came out, until it became an issue, and the hospital notified docs, and then they notified the child protection. So
and just on that, because it is quite interesting, and I've had a couple of cases like that with Munchausen by proxy, where the parent makes a child ill to get attention for the suffering parent, but in doing so injures the child or makes the child sick, and
sometimes accidentally kills them.
Quite often, unfortunately. But that would have been an interesting interview because I found people like that, they're very hard to break them down and admit to what they're actually doing. So, and especially being a nurse, it would have been a fascinating interview.
Well, how she gave herself away actually was because she was trying to show how much she knew without putting her hands up and saying, yes, I did it. It was enough to, for the magistrate to say, no, she's guilty. And so she didn't get put away or anything, but she had the child taken off her.
Right.
So that was a positive because if he'd stayed with the mum, he probably wouldn't be, he would have eventually been overdosed on something.
Well, it does escalate. I've certainly seen it. I had one with Jaden March, who was a murder of a young child, a foster child, and that was building up where the the foster mother kept presenting the child to hospital time and time again, and eventually he did die. But that would have been doing an investigation like that. I would imagine that would be very satisfying.
That was very interesting, and just the I think we did, the interview went for hours and hours, and finally she just kind of gave away a little bit too much without putting her hands up. But it was enough, as I said, to kind of make you realise that she was guilty.
That psychology of the interview room, and that's what I find particularly interesting in cases like that it's difficult for the parents not to participate in the interview. They're claiming that the child's sick and they love the child. And, okay, well, if that's the case, are you going to participate in the interview? And invariably they say yes, because otherwise they wave the red flag at the police going, well, why don't you want to participate in the interview?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's hard for a parent, and you're a parent, to understand why anyone would want to make their kid sick, because that's the last thing you want. You do not want to go to hospital. You don't want to have your kid sick. So for them to be doing it on purpose is a really hard thing to get your head around.
Yeah. And it's hard to prove it in front of a jury if it goes to trial too. Getting a cross-section of the community to understand that a parent can actually harm a child is very difficult.
Right. And so when I was in child protection, I did a few things where the children were being harmed. Some of it was due to postnatal depression and things like that. But there was a few historical sexual assaults that were really horrible to deal with, and they were young boys of 16, 17 back 15 years ago who got abused by their their scout leader kind of thing.
Right.
And I did a whole lot of work on that. And the poor, the guys have all grown up now. They've all got issues. There was 5 of them. And, did a really good, me and my team did a really good, investigation of it. We had some really good evidence. And not long before it was going to go to court, the alleged offender, he was in a really bad car accident and became unable to stand trial because he was supposedly a vegetable. I don't think he was as bad as they were making out, but he couldn't stand trial. So all that work and all the hope that the victims had for all those years thought, we might get some justice, went out the window because it just couldn't go to court.
That would have been hard for the victims because
it was terrible.
Taking the courage to come forward.
Yeah, and you feel guilty yourself, as you would know. You feel guilty you've let them down. Yeah. But, so that's another side of,
Well, you do get to see, in that line of work, you do get to see the worst side of life, don't you?
Oh, definitely.
Like the child sexual assaults and the flow-on effect it has from that, where it literally destroys.
I think anyone who's been through that can never get past it.
Yeah. They carry that for the rest of their life.
Forever, yeah, that's right.
How did you find working in there? Did you find it rewarding?
Yes, it would have been better if we could have put someone like that away. But, it was a learning experience and it was rewarding, yeah. I did a lot of search warrants and jobs, relating to pedophilia and stuff like that. So I wouldn't want to do that for a long time, but it was good, for learning your trade and learning to be an investigator and a detective and doing a lot of, I was going to say comedy, stand up when you're doing, your not stand up comedy.
Wouldn't have gone that, no.
When you're doing a search warrant, it wouldn't have gone down well. But just a lot of talking in front of the camera about what you're doing with search warrants and leading them and that kind of stuff. That was all very good experience.
Yeah. And did you work as a detective at Newtown Detectives Office?
No. I was only in GDs at Newtown.
Right. Okay.
So my time as a detective was more when I was in the firearms squad.
Yes.
And at child protection and at licensing squad.
Okay. And licensing, what type of work did you do in licensing?
My undercover kind of skills came into that actually, which worked out quite well. We would go, it was a licensing agency. The names kept changing over every couple of years. The names changed. The job was still the same.
Name and change and someone to get a promotion for
or
changing
new boss
the name.
Or something like that, yeah. So the gist of it was basically looking into organised crime within the licence and gaming industries. So that was good. So I was doing a lot of profiling. I did the analyst course. So I was doing a lot of profiling on bikies and people that were behind the scenes in some of the big hotels, like the Black Market Hotel that was around then. There was a lot of stuff happening there.
Well, in saying that, the Black Market Cafe, there was a triple murder there.
Murder there with the bikies,
Sunday afternoon, I remember that one.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was, I can't remember exactly what went down with that, but I do know that it was
a conflict between two
gangs. Yeah. Okay, that's usually what happens, isn't it? Yeah, there was another place I worked at where, and a black market I actually worked at too, where I'd go in and you just go in with plain clothes on in a covert capacity and just see what was going on in the premises. That's from the licensing side, but then that would also kind of lead into drugs as well, because I remember one night I was in there and there was just, blatant people, snorting cocaine or whatever it might be on tables next to me and stuff like that. So that would kind of lead on to other jobs. But we were there for the purpose of just making sure they were doing everything right and they weren't allowing, young people in and stuff like that. But often we got called in to like places that were a problem in the country areas as well, because the local cops didn't want to, deal with it or couldn't deal with it. And you just go in and you just kind of work not full on undercover, but like just plain clothes, and you just pick up what was going on, if there was drugs being sold, if whatever was happening in the place.
So your role was to go in as a patron, in effect.
A patron, yep,
and keep observations.
You got paid
on
to have a
what's going
drink,
on.
yeah.
But like to be the patron in, or be a patron in the type of premises like the Black Market Cafe, it's not the type of place where you see a lot of police, so you're not going to walk in.
No, I had to wear my, spikes coming out of my head, and no, it was a very strange place. Yeah, you kind of had to try and fit in. I always had a camera in my bag, little handbag, a little covert camera, because at one stage when they opened, they had whipping shows and candle wax dripping on people. It was a bizarre place.
Yeah.
But
how did you find going? Because you had children at that time.
Yes, I would have had kids there. I would have been very young.
So you're going from a mother and the environment there, then going into that type of world. How did you find that?
I always found like doing anything that's covert or undercover is like almost being an actress.
Yeah.
Like you're just being somebody else for that period of time. That's kind of how you're somebody else. I had a fake name.
Make the adjustment from
I think so.
worlds?
Yeah, I think I was always told I never looked like a cop. Like even when I was younger, people go, I can't believe you're a cop. You don't look like a cop. What's a stereotypical female cop look like? Yeah. Or a male, I don't know. But people have, tall, short hair, whatever in their head. So I would just make and I used to always have my hair back usually when I was working, so I'd just make myself look very different. So nobody would know, even if they'd seen me as a police officer, they wouldn't really recognise me as somebody that was in, a nightclub or wherever.
Did your children recognise you when you came home?
They would have been in bed, but we'd be getting home at 5 a.m. But later on, wasn't just licensing, it became drugs as well. So I'd be going into nightclubs, and one that was really kind of the end of my undercover. I was always part-time undercover. I never worked full-time, but I just got called in to do certain jobs and role plays and things like that. But, there's a place called the Embassy down at Double Bay in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and Renee Rivkin was the owner.
Yep.
Massive drugs going on in there. So I would go in with a couple of undercover girls and basically just do cold starts and walk up to people and ask for the drugs, and it was too easy almost. They were just handing out cocaine and speed and whatever you wanted, ecstasy tablets, whatever was happening in that day, and the whole idea of that was if you could get so many buys within a period of time, you could close the premises down for a period of time.
So you would purchase the drugs as they're offered to you? Yeah,
they were great. Yeah, really enjoyed the drugs. No, yes, I would purchase the drugs. I would hand them over to my supervisor. And then he would, then it would go through to the lab and they'd test what it was. Usually it wasn't what they said it was. It was usually I was purchasing a lot of cocaine. It was speed or something like that. And then it would eventually get to court.
So when you go in there and purchase drugs and that, like, do you feel compromised, or do you have to compromise yourself to get the sale of the drugs?
The hardest part about being, I think, a female undercover operative is that a lot of the guys that are selling the drugs, they want to give it to you because they want something in return. Right. And so that was one of the, and that's not a buy. You've got to buy the drugs to have to be able to charge them with it. So that was a hard one. You had to kind of do a lot of talking. I'm not taking it for myself. It's for a friend. Because they'd often say, "Come, I've got a motel room across the road. Why don't we go and test it?"
They basically want to go party with you. And
yeah, that's right.
Tiptoe through that negotiation.
Yeah. And you've just got to have a cover story. You've just got to make and stick to that, and just hope that wears. And if they're not going to come to the party, well, then you move on to somebody else.
Were you scared in that environment?
Sometimes, but I think was more nervous when I'd have to go to court later on and face that person that I bought the drugs off, and they're thinking they're just supplying it to some girl in a nightclub, and then they realise it's a police officer and they're not looking at you very nicely then. And I also had a lot of surveillance operatives around me that I knew well, and so usually I could see somebody that I worked with, so I'd know that I was okay. And you're in a nightclub, you're in a controlled environment. The biggest fear of any undercover person is that them finding out you're a cop, because then, and that's one of the first things a lot of them ask you, how do I know you're not a cop? I go, well, how do I know you're not a cop? So it's just that your own insecurities or your own worries can become an issue if you let them. So you just have to play the part the best way you can.
Mm. And did you find it difficult to get into that role?
No, I thought it was great. It was fun.
So did you go out there with I'm going out to party type attitude to make it believable?
Basically,
obviously, you're
not, you're dressed like you're going to a nightclub.
Yeah.
And this is going. My kids were young. I was around the 30 years old or something. So I didn't stand out that I was too old to be where I was. But I did actually. The oldest person I locked up for supplying me some ecstasy tablets was a 62-year-old,
and
he was dancing on it.
Isn't it time he grew up?
He was a party boy. He didn't want to grow up. So you never know, do you?
Okay.
You never know
how to stay young.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting experience. And so towards the latter part of your career, so you're in for 20 years.
That's right. Yeah.
What other things did you do within policing? Is there any other?
No, that's about it. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's 20 years goes, a lot happens in 20 years.
Where were you when you finished up?
I was in firearms. I was in the firearms squad out at headquarters at Parramatta. Yep. That's where I was when I finished. And I don't know if you want me to go into...
Yeah, well, some of the jobs you did there, I think that...
Well, we did a lot of... firearms kind of, it crosses over with drugs and we did a bit of licensing there too. So they all kind of worked together. It was actually a really great place to work because you did a lot of trips, a lot of country trips. Anywhere where there was firearms, there's usually drugs found. So you kind of do combined job. Yeah. I worked in with the plantation unit as well for a while. So I had a few nice trips to Byron Bay.
You did the usual Byron Bay.
Yeah, I couldn't complain about that.
So what we're talking about there is at a certain time of year when the cannabis plants are ripe and the drug squad tend to identify the locations and they have the trips up to the North Coast where it's nice and humid and lush, good area for growing
a lot of plants.
Cannabis.
Yeah.
Cannabis eradication operations, isn't it? Is that what it's called?
That sounds about right, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know what they do now, but they used to put all the plants into back of a big truck and then take them somewhere to burn them all. And I remember just being in the front of the truck and going slowly through the main streets of Byron Bay and people just coming out of everywhere and trying to grab the leaves off the like the things that were hanging out off the branches or whatever hanging off the side of the truck. And they just grabbed. They didn't care. We were driving at 2 kilometres an hour, so we didn't run people over. They were just coming out of nowhere, and they're like, I'll have a bit of that. They didn't care. They just But,
lucky you didn't try to get through Nimbin.
Yeah, well, yeah, that'd probably be worse. But that was an experience because I saw how they lived and went up in the helicopter and, just spotting the plants from above. And, it was really...
It is interesting up there at the hinterland in Lampham. I did the murder investigation up there and the communes and different places. I went to one commune and I forget the name of it, but I remember when we pulled up in an unmarked police car, everyone just scattered and said, government car.
Oh, really?
Just all ran off into the jungle or into the bush.
And you're never going to find them because it's so bushy.
Yeah.
I know. I remember trekking through all these different places because a lot of the time the plants would be on Crown land. So, you can't really charge anybody. If they're on somebody's property, you can go to that person and what's going on and make an arrest. But a lot of them was just in the middle of nowhere and you track through all this bush and then there'd be a clearing and there's a teepee. And there's people sitting around the teepee and bathtubs and it was just a different world.
Yeah, it is a different world. I remember sitting down in one place. It wasn't a teepee, but it was close to it. And the people I was getting a statement from were complaining about their kids. You raise them the right way and they go off the tracks. Now, these are druggies that were complaining that their kids they go to school every day and they want to get a job. And we tried to raise them properly. So,
you got no idea.
How they rebel.
Yeah.
You got out of the cops. Your choice?
No, I suppose to answer it shortly. No, unfortunately, I did develop post-traumatic stress disorder. What happened was I went to work one day. I was actually doing a search warrant at a firearms, where they go for target practice, and I was holding the video camera as protocol. We video all the search warrants to make sure everything's done the right way, and I just started shaking, and I felt my heart kind of going 100 miles an hour, and I thought that's really weird. That doesn't normally happen, and I said to somebody, I can't hold the camera straight. Can you take it off me? And someone said, I think you're getting a bit of anxiety. I didn't even know what anxiety was really. I'd never had it. And from there, I left that day, and I caught a train back into town, and I just had my first panic attack on the train. This massive panic attack came out of absolutely nowhere. I just had this feeling of doom and gloom that my kids I knew they were being minded by my parents. I knew they were okay, but I thought, they're dead. I just felt dizzy, felt sick. I had my gun on me. I was going back to the office to drop off my gun. I thought someone's going to grab my gun and shoot me. The railway tracks were coming up to meet me in the face. I was just in full, absolutely petrified. Thought I was dying. I just thought I was dying, and I was actually meeting some friends in a pub in town near Central to have a catch up. And by the time I got there, I was apparently completely white, and they've gone, "What happened?" And I said, "I'm having a heart attack or something. Get me to hospital. Get me to RPA." And they went, "Oh, one guy there and they were all cops. One said, 'Oh, someone did this to me last week. You're having a panic attack.'" And I said, no, I'm dying. And, finally I calmed down and had a drink of water and everything, and then, burst out crying and went, what the hell happened? What happened to me? And then I think I got taken home, and I just sat in a corner and rocked for a while, and I was just an absolute basket case mess. And then it just kept happening. It just came out of the blue, and then once I'd had one, it just would happen again in a couple of days. And I was going to work. I'd go into the toilets and have a freak out and try and, reapply my makeup, splash water on my face. That went on for about 2 years. I went to emergency. One time I got my father to take me to St George Hospital, where I was pouring water over my head because I thought I was going to spontaneously combust. And I didn't want to go in the hospital because that was full of sick people. And then when I finally got in there, the doctor said, "I think you're probably the healthiest person in the hospital here." But he pointed to his head and he kind of went, "Up there, not so much. I think you need some help." And it took a long time to get it through my thick head that I did need help. I just thought, I'll take a week off work and do some walks and calm down, and because I just didn't know what was happening. I'd gone from being a very confident, competent person, I thought, to not being able to get out of bed and get my kids to school, and I was scared of everything. I thought everyone was dying. And it sounded like it came on very dramatically too. You had no inclination that it was a build-up to that, because it's a fairly dramatic step into it. It was like 1 minute I was okay, and then had this panic attack, and I didn't even know what a panic attack was. So yeah, and that went on and off for a couple of years. I just struggled with it. And you
stayed at work?
Yeah, I stayed at work. Yeah. I think a couple of people that I was close to. They didn't really understand it, but they, were sympathetic enough, like not really sure what's happening to you, and I didn't know what was happening to me. But the last time I left work and I never went back, I actually just sat for my sergeant's exam on the computer, and I had a massive panic attack afterwards. Don't know why. I just finished the exam. I should have been calm, and I just lost it. And boss said, "Look, I think you go home. We'll drive you home." And I said, No. I'll be right. I'll go home myself. And I don't remember leaving work, and I don't remember getting home. And it was an hour's trip. And apparently, I was talking to my mum on the phone illegally, but I didn't care. And I was just saying, "Meet me at the hospital. Don't let them do an autopsy on me. I don't want an autopsy." And my poor mum, she's going, "Oh my God!" And she was minding my kids, so I think she palmed them off to somebody else. And when I got to a medical centre, and I was breathing so badly that they thought I was having an asthma attack. I don't actually have asthma. I was just like hyperventilating. The doctor said, "You're scaring me." And so when a doctor says you're scaring me, that's not a good thing. They called an ambulance and all the rest of it. They actually thought I was physically, something really bad was happening. So that was making me worse. But then once I started to calm down a little bit, because I think as soon as you're at the doctor's surgery, I felt safe. Yeah. Like somebody's going to be able to help me.
When did you accept that was the you were suffering from post-traumatic stress. And
it took a while too.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to admit it because I didn't want to I couldn't believe that would happen to me. I didn't even know if I believed it was a thing. Post-traumatic stress was a thing.
Yep.
Because I knew other people who had gone off work because of stress. They'd call it just stress then. And you're like, oh, really? Oh, that's a shame. But, I just can't get my head around that.
I'm reflecting on it. You didn't really think about it, did you? So
no, and it had that stigma.
It became too much, but you didn't think much more than that.
Well, too, you felt weak. You felt like, oh, you can't deal with it anymore. Like what? And you're thinking, I can't deal with the smallest tasks to compared to like what I was doing years ago and, controlling crime scenes and running search warrants and doing just stuff that you didn't even think about.
Did you come to terms and acknowledge the fact that it was your police career or things you've seen and done that brought that on?
I ended up seeking help and I think that was the beginning of me realising that there was an issue.
Yeah.
And my psychiatrist told me a story, and he said the first time, psychologist. Then I went to a psychiatrist after that, and the first day he said, "I just want to see the way you're thinking." He was dealing with a lot of cops, and he said, "I had a guy in here the other day, and he was still in the police, very upset because he'd been bashed up, and he'd lost his police issue sunglasses in the punch up." And he got back to the station, he had blood all over him and everything. They said, "You need to go to hospital." He's going, "No, I need another pair of sunglasses." And they're going, "No, you've got blood everywhere. You have to go." And you go, "Just give me the sunglasses." And, he went on to tell the whole story for a while. And then he said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Why didn't they just give him the sunglasses?" And he said, "You're missing the point. He was bleeding everywhere. He should have been in hospital." I went, oh, yeah, well, that's probably happened to him many times before. He was worried about his glasses. And he said, "Do you understand how..." I think it was then it clicked to me. I'm not thinking the way that I should be thinking. That's left field. I shouldn't be.
I'm just making notes here. That worries me because I was thinking, why didn't they give him his sunglasses?
And maybe it's I think it's just the way we think. Anyone else was horrified that he was so cut up and hurt.
Yeah.
And all this guy was worried about his sunglasses. I think that was the point they were trying to get, the way we think differently. And it wasn't until my psychiatrist later on said to me, "You've been struggling with this for a couple of years. You've been working. You take a few days off. Do you think you're going to get yourself better?" And then it happens again a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
You're never going to get better until you leave the police. And he said, "You make the decision. You struggle with this for the rest of your life if you like, or you leave the police force, because that's where it's coming from."
You made the decision and you left the
police? Well, yeah. Eventually I had to go, well, what do I do? I've got to get myself better. I had children. I had to, but I think what you said before was I did get interviewed and had independent psychiatrists kind of examine me, all that kind of stuff. And they all came to the conclusion that I'd had a very happy childhood, and which I did, and that I would not have been in the place that I was if I hadn't been exposed to what I had been exposed to. And I've always made it very clear whenever I've done any, talks about my books, and they're always wanting to know about my police career, that, I don't blame the police force for that. That was just part of the job, and that's how it affected me. I just couldn't get my head around the fact that some of the stuff that it would affect me had happened in my first couple of years, and this is now 15, 17, 18 years down the track. But I think when I had kids too, it got worse because I was always worried about them dying.
Yeah.
Like I'd rush them up to the hospital if they had a cold. Nurses would say, "She's got a cough, take her home, she's got a cold." I go, "She's going to die." And they'd go, "No," So
became overprotective.
Everything was, about death. And then, I was having dreams, nightmares about being locked in the morgue. Not exactly how it happened, as I told you, but similar. I could never get out of this room. There was no doors and there was bodies everywhere. And I didn't even think too much about that until the psychiatrist said to me, "Do you think that kind of goes back to you being locked in the morgue?" And I went, "No, why would it?" Hadn't thought of that. How dumb. Like I needed somebody else to kind of put things in perspective and point things out to me.
Perspective is the thing that if you do get help, and I'm not speaking here with any expertise whatsoever, but if you do get help, it's having someone look at it from a different perspective.
Exactly.
From the police. But after you've left the police...
Yeah, so I didn't want to leave the police. I had to make that call eventually. Yeah, after I left, I was very lost and didn't really know what to do with myself. My girls were at school by that stage, so I had the daytime hours to, fill in. I actually liked being at home because I was only 10 minutes from the school in case something happened. I was always very worried about things happening to them, which is all part of the post-traumatic stress. my mother was an author. Her name was Lynn Wilding, and she had 13 internationally best-selling books before she passed away. And she said to me, why don't you just write your stories down? Because I used to come home and tell her, offload on her when I was still living at home when I was younger. And I'd read some of her books and she'd put my stories in her books. And I think, hang on, that's my story. I go, you didn't even ask me permission. But she'd get some of her ideas and hers were mainly romance, stories. But she'd often have Karen the cop in there and she'd done this and that. And I'm like, that's my story. But she said, well, why don't you do the same with your stories? Because you've told me the funny ones, the scary ones, the sad ones, and just get it off your chest. So that's kind of how I hadn't done any writing, wasn't interested in writing, loved reading, but hadn't done a report since, police report. And so I just started writing down my stories, and I started with the really bad ones, the fatal car accidents and the hangings and things that, cot deaths and Lady on Fire. That was one thing which I've actually written in my book. That was 6 months into it, where we turned up at a job where she'd set herself on fire and wanted to commit suicide. And I was standing there talking to her for 20 minutes until the ambos got there, and then they took her off to hospital. And I said, "Oh, she'll be all right. She was just talking to me." The ambulance officer said, "No, love, she'll be dead soon. She's in shock." And 3 hours later, sure enough, I'm at the morgue identifying her. So that always stayed. And she was about 30.
You don't forget those things.
No, and she looked like she was black, so I didn't know what she looked like when we got a passport. She was a very attractive, blonde Norwegian lady or something, and broken up with a boyfriend and decided to burn herself. So, so things like that stay with you. And now I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, we're talking how you got into writing books.
Oh, that's right. So
you're writing your memoirs, for want of a better word.
Yeah. So I wrote and that was just for myself.
Yeah.
And I entitled it "Cop This," and I just I was in such a bad place that I wanted to get some of these things off my chest. And I even did a bit of a tour around Newtown and some of the places that had really affected me, and just kind of sat there and remembered that, I'd gone to a cot death in there and all that kind of stuff to just try and get myself past it, and actually did help. But writing helped a lot too, because once I'd got it out, I felt like I'd dealt with it, because I don't think... in a way. Cathartic, definitely, and I think hard at times, especially when you're trying to remember all the details of something horrible. But once it was down, I felt like I'd got it literally off my chest. It was on paper, it was on the computer, and I dealt with it, because I don't think we're so busy when general duties or detective. You've got so many jobs. You're going from one to the other. Like one night I had my life threatened. Yeah, and from having a bottle put to my throat and being threatened to, thought I was going to die 1 minute, and then had to go straight to an overdose, straight after that. You didn't even have time to process it. And I think that's probably what came back to bite me later on. So writing these things down did help, because it was like I'd finally dealt with some of the grief or the, I don't know what you'd call it, but it was just, I felt like I'd done and dusted, move it away now.
And you've turned your memoirs into 3 books now.
Well, so and how that happened was my mother showed her agent, Selwa Anthony, who was a good friend of hers as well as her agent. She showed her this, unbeknownst to me, and her agent said, "Well, if you can turn these real life stories, put a fictional turn on them, you might have another career." But by this stage, unfortunately, my mum had cancer, and she was very sick, and she passed away before I'd even thought about writing seriously. So once she passed, I thought, I'll give it a go. Like, what have I got to lose? I'd already done the memoirs. And so I just I remember saying to my dad, "Where do I start?" And he said, "Well, just start with a young police officer like you once were, and what about a big bad bikie, something like that." And that was the first thought, and I went, okay. And I just remembered back to a job that we went to where a bikie went berserk at a clubhouse, and he picked up a fridge and threw it at everybody because somebody had called his girlfriend a not nice name or something. He lost it, and he picked up a fridge, and that was the beginning of my book. It got taken out later on, and as you know, it changes all the time. But that was the beginning, and it kind of just went from there. But of course, I didn't know how to write a book. I knew how to be a police officer, and I knew what detectives officers were like.
So you could write a set of facts, but writing a fictional crime book.
Fill in the occurrence pad. I'll do all of that stuff, but writing. So I had to do a lot of research and read how to write fiction for dummies. Did a short course, and just analysed crime books, which
what I find about the books, and I'm reading Fatal Mistake, and that was the third book.
That's the third one.
I picked up on it pretty quick, and the main character in it's Lexi Rogers.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's a female detective.
Yep.
That's worked in and around Newtown and different places, very similar to you.
A little bit similar, yeah.
How much of you is in Lexi Rogers?
I've been asked quite a few times now if I am Lexi Rogers, but I would have to say no, not really. We have a lot in common. A lot of the things that have happened to Lexi have happened to me, or and vice versa. But no, Lexi is a figment of my imagination, I suppose. There is a lot of me as when I was younger in there, but all my characters are usually a combination of a couple of people. Like her partner, Brad, who is like the real sturdy, great bloke to work with, dependable. He's a couple of guys that I worked with, and I just take, some of their characteristics and stuff. Some of the baddies are very close to the truth. I remember when I was writing my first one, I had a friend who worked with me at Newtown kind of look at it and he said, "You're going to get sued if you put that name in there. It's too close to the real one." So I went, okay, change that completely. But usually my stories are pretty close to the truth because that's where I get the ideas from.
I think that jumps out of your book reading it, like the protocol, the type of things that happen within policing, it jumps out of the pages in your book, and that's what I enjoyed reading it, because sometimes I read it and go, no, it's not. But to me, it's pretty clear that the author has walked that path. Well,
I think especially coming from my biggest fear when I was writing was what would other police think?
Yeah.
Because coming from that background, I wanted to keep it as real as possible. Yeah. And I think as a cop, when you're reading something that hasn't been written by a cop, or you can tell if it's not right, and you go, oh, and that just irks you.
But more so than the little protocol things, the nuances about what it's like when you're paired with a partner at work that you don't quite like, or you don't click, or
the creepy guy in the back that's breathing down your throat, breathing down your neck when you're in a meeting and you're like, oh, go away.
I never had a creepy bloke breathe down the back of my neck, but in a meeting. But anyway.
You don't know what you missed.
Yeah, I can imagine. But no, what I like about it is that it gives you a sense of, because it's told from a police point of view, it gives you a sense of what it's like to be a police officer and the type of things that you walk into, the humour that comes out of it. But did you feel exposed writing about it? Did you feel like you're exposing a little bit of yourself in the book?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think anybody who writes a book, no matter what it's you're always putting some of yourself in there, aren't you? Because you're gathering your own life experiences, and especially me writing crime, it's a lot of my experiences. So nearly, I've had people say to me, that wouldn't happen, and I said, well, it did happen because I was there, and it sounds. It's bizarre, but I don't want to make it up. It's not Mission Impossible where you're jumping out of planes and shooting someone at the same time. It's real. Of course, there's that fiction because you've got to make it interesting. Yeah. But I suppose I like to say that it's fiction derived from reality.
I think that's a good way of putting it, because that's certainly what jumps out of the pages. That I can imagine the scenarios that are in there that you've put in there. But
that's a very big compliment coming from you, because any police, I was so scared about what other police would think, and as far as I know, to my face, I've only ever had compliments. So that's that means a lot.
That's good. Is there a lot
to my face?
Behind your back that you've got to worry about. Trust
all those
me.
Knives.
Have you had police that think they're characters in the book?
Yes, exactly. Oh, dear, that's quite funny. A lot of my male colleagues always think they're the love interest, the good sort, the good-looking Josh, who's a bit dreamy.
They're all putting their hands
they're
up.
They're all him.
That must have been
they're all him.
Off,
they're not the big fat chain smoking, gross guy that's breathing down your neck. They're the good sort, of course.
So, okay, again, as a detective, I ask the hard questions. I'm not going to shy away from the hard questions.
I think I know what's coming.
Writing sex scenes in the book. How'd you feel doing that?
Oh, there's so many answers I could give, but I made them up. Yeah, what do you do? I just looked at other books and I just cut and pasted it. No, I'll get done for plagiarism. No, I suppose I'm a big reader. I was just I did study other sex scenes because I wanted to know what stood out as, that's a pretty boring sex scene, or you want a real good one. So I would take it from other things I'd read, and the rest, just came from what I've heard. What do you want me to say?
No, see the interview technique, the pregnant pause. I just hold and you just keep talking.
Yeah, you're true.
I've just dropped the pregnant
shut
pause
up.
on you.
Yeah, I've said too much.
No, look, I think they're great books, and I'm really impressed with the fact that you've made a career outside the cops and doing something that you've come through. Obviously, you enjoyed your time in the police. You had your hard times, but now you're channeling your energy in there, and I like it. I'll be honest, I don't read a lot of fiction, but you've sort of got me back into it reading the book. I've enjoyed it.
Well, you got to read the first two now.
I know. I can read the first two without it.
Yeah.
You
can. A lot of people read them, it's the same characters, but obviously the story changes. They're different stories and stuff, and they develop as they go along. But I've enjoyed doing it. Like when writing, I started just as a therapy thing. Yeah. Never knowing or thinking that I would get, published. So I've been very lucky. I had an agent I already knew, and she kind of mentored me a bit. And then I think I was just there at the right time. Like it's like anything, it's harder to get a book published now than it was when I got my first one, was 2013.
Is there another one coming? Another one on the way?
I've got one, and I've kind of taken a little bit of a break, but I have got one I've actually got two that I'm working on depending on my mood on the day. Yeah. But they're in the back. They're not coming out anytime soon, but I think the first two came out very quickly because I got a 2-book deal, so I was pretty overwhelmed with how quickly I had to get them out, and it was all of a sudden 4 years making the first one, Sinister Intent. Got a 2-book deal, so I had to write the second one in 9 months and edited the first one. I was learning what I was doing, didn't know what was going on. So I had a bit of a rest, and then I wrote the third one, which came out in 2017.
There's such an appetite for true crime and crime fiction and all that. So I think combining the two with your true crime stories into fiction, you've possibly hit on the right formula. So we've got Sinister Intent, Deadly Obsession, and Fatal Mistake.
That's right.
In that orders.
Yep.
Where can people get them?
You can get them online, Booktopia. You can order them from bookshops. They're not on the shelves anymore. They only last on the shelves for a short time. But, any good bookshop can order them in for you, or you can just search online for them, or under my name. I write under Karen M. Davis. Okay. And, you can still get them.
Well, Karen, I think today you've given a really interesting insight into the life of a policewoman. Joined in 1987, left in 2007. Mm-hmm. Fascinating stories, and I think we could talk all day on this, but I have the time limits. But maybe I get you back. Maybe I get you back for the.
I don't want to bore people, I
don't think it's boring. In fact, I'm wrapping up a podcast where you said, "Well, my life was threatened, and someone had a beer bottle at my throat, and I haven't even asked you what that was about." Yeah.
Another story.
So I don't get criticised. What was that about?
The beer bottle. It was just it was right at the back of right where the courthouse hotel is, right behind the station. Yeah. We'd gone to a guy who'd been stabbed, and I was actually had a towel around him. I had something around him and was trying to keep the knife wedged inside him till the ambulance got there. And he had a couple of sons who were well known to the police, and they were off their face on whatever, and alcohol and drugs. And I was trying to help his dad, this guy's dad, and all of a sudden he was drinking a beer, and he just smashed it on the side of the curb and just grabbed me. I was actually kneeling down over his father, got me in a headlock, and put the smashed bottle to my throat and said, "I'm going to kill you." And I couldn't fathom it at the time because I was actually trying to help, but for whatever reason, he just lost it. I remember thinking, just keep your hand on your gun so he can't take my gun and shoot me with my gun, because one of the constable at Newtown just before I got there had been killed with his own gun. And my partner froze. And she was just screaming into the radio signal 1, which, stop everything, all police get there as quick as possible. And but she wasn't giving a location. And luckily I'd called off and said, this is where we're going off at this location. And so the cops from the station just came running around. And as soon as, we got surrounded by police, the guy let me go and he got locked up. But, that was... Well, a scary one.
I think that's a good way to end the podcast, and maybe could be seen in your next book. But how I got away when someone had a bottle at my throat. But Karen, look, thanks very much for coming on. I've enjoyed it. It's been a great chat, and very interesting stories. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Cheers. This podcast series is brought to you by True Crime Australia. Visit icatchkillers.com.au for additional material such as articles on what you heard, videos and galleries. You can search for the I Catch Killers with Gary Jubelin official group on Facebook and join in with discussion. See you for the next episode of the podcast.